us in us. The Lord is here, always with us. How lovely He is, how content we are. We talk to Him, and He always listens. He'll always be with us, in us. O Lord, come now and join us here. We ask you to come and give us cheer. Fill us with joy from your Holy Spirit, and peace no riches can provide. O Lord, come now and join us here. We ask you to come and give us cheer. Fill us.
All right. How lovely, truly, it is to be together. Thank you all so much for joining us today here at St. Mary's Coptic Church in Delaware. We are a small but mighty group, and we're just so happy to welcome you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. And we are so excited to welcome Tasoni Lillian here today to speak with us on her new book. Wow, round of applause, you guys. That's huge. That's huge. And on such an important topic, you know, it's something we are always struggling with, always kind of like trying to learn more. But I love that we have now a resource from such an experienced person to help us answer some of these tough questions that we have, you know, in these tough moments. Okay, so I'll tell you all a little bit about Tasoni Lillian, okay? And I'd love, I think, to hear a little bit more from you, too, about your experiences. But so Tasoni Lillian is trained as an engineer, but found this passion for helping support people through these challenging moments in their lives, and learned and was trained as a life coach. And through her experiences as a life coach, then was able to bring these vast experiences, her personal experiences, her experiences helping support people through some of the challenges they've faced, and of course, by guidance of the church and the Bible, was able to bring us this knowledge into her book on waiting and dating. Okay, and a little bit on her book. Okay, so on waiting and dating, it explores the dynamics of singleness and dating from an Orthodox Christian perspective, right? And it's exploring why, when, how, and who to date even. So we actually last night got to talk a little bit about the 5 F's of compatibility, and understanding those like important components of like understanding who is a right match. And so I really loved that perspective. Okay, and she also tackles topics like purity, sexuality, temptation, and repentance, all really important things on our journey of getting to know ourselves and one another. She's so passionate about helping each of us navigate Christian dating and thrive in our godly relationships. And so if we can give Tasoni Lillian a big round of applause. Welcome her up. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. That was a very lovely introduction. But I think you covered pretty much everything there. Let's put it up. There we go. This one. Great. So thank you guys for having me here. There we go. Okay. So as Gabby mentioned, you know, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I think, you know, growing up here in the States, but also coming from Egypt at a young age, you're trying to navigate, like, you know, 2 cultures of keeping our faith and our values, but also navigating, like, the secular world that we live in and trying not to be so influenced by it. So especially in a topic that's maybe a little bit new, or maybe there's a bit of a stigma sometimes around it from, you know, our community or growing up in it. Our parents didn't really have this sort of like courtship period or dating period. If you go, back far enough, even in the American culture, dating didn't exist maybe like 120 years ago. It was, arranged marriages. It was, this person, you kind of get engaged, that's how you know each other, and then goes to marriage. So the idea is fairly new, like looking from like a historic perspective. Especially growing up in our church, you hear things like, hey, don't talk to the opposite gender, right, while you're young. I've, been in some where even the Sunday school is separated, boys and girls separate. And then you kind of cross a line maybe when you graduate college or like when you're getting established, maybe you have a job, and then they start asking you, hey, like, why aren't you married yet? Like, what's taking so long? Like, ya lawzi nifrah bik, right? Like, what's taking you so long? What's going on here? And you're like, hold on, you just told me that I couldn't talk to girls or I couldn't talk to boys, like yesterday. Now you're kind of, asking me what's the holdup. So hopefully this book kind of transitions you from one to the other. It helps you kind of navigate this, very important time in your life where you're making, I would argue, maybe the biggest decision of your life. Think about all the other decisions that we make. You can kind of, change your mind along the way, like in a career, right? You pick something, you think you really want to do this for the rest of your life, you start working in it, and you're like, you know what, it's really not what I like. Really easy to change careers, right? Might take some time and effort. A lot harder to do that with a spouse, right? that's the goal of it is to the end, for sure. So going back from the beginning, in order to understand, what it looks like choosing the right partner, we want to see where it was actually started, right? In the garden, this is where God really institutes the sacrament of holy matrimony, right? After God created everything, he said, everything was good, right? The heavens, the seas, the stars, the moon, he created night and day and everything, he said it was good, it was good, it was good. And he stopped at one point and he said, something is not good here. What was not good? For man to be alone, right? It is not good for man to be alone. I shall create him a helper comparable to him. And that's where Eve comes into the picture. Adam wakes up, her there, and he says, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And now it's like instruction for us, right? Adam and Eve didn't have a father and mother for them to leave, right? So this whole idea of leaving and cleaving to your spouse, is instruction all the way from the beginning of creation. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Now you can kind of flip over the page in Genesis, go to chapter 3, and you see that they're now hiding after, right? They took of the forbidden fruit. They now have the knowledge of good and evil. They know they're naked, right? They have awareness of this shame that it's talking about. God comes to Adam and he says, why are you hiding? He's like, well, I'm hiding because I'm naked, right? He's like, well, what happened? He's like, oh, it was the fruit. And then if you look at the specific verse, it says something like, when God asks Adam, he says, well, the woman that you gave me, she's the one who gave me of this fruit. So we go from bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, we're one here, to, hey, that's her fault. Now we're going to start pointing the finger. This like blame game kind of starts off. And from the fall, we see kind of the brokenness of our humanity and all the way down to our relationships. And now we're trying to get back to this paradise that was lost. We're trying to get back to this perfect union that's supposed to be between us, between God, even the representation of, the husband being the bridegroom and the wife being the bride as the church, or as Christ being the bridegroom. And we'll talk a little bit about, what that looks like as well. So really, from the beginning, it was something that was created by God for us, for this, beautiful union to live in harmony. But not everybody's path is marriage, right? Statistically speaking, yes, most of us will get married, but some of us won't. Some of us will find ourselves on this path of singleness. So the first thing to really do, even before you jump into dating, think of this first talk, we're prepared, we're thinking about what it means to be single and what it means to be dating. And then the second talk, we're going to get more into the dating aspect. So this is like all the prep work that we really should be going through before we jump into a relationship. Whether you have the desire for marriage or whether you have the desire for like a celibate life, and that can look very different for different people, right? Whether that's in like a monastery or a convent, or there's consecrated servants, or there are people who just kind of dedicate their lives to their career and then to serve God in the time that they have outside of that. Some of us also, have the idea of going on the marriage path, but you kind of find yourself in that singleness path. The whole point here is to recognize that both of them should be leading you to salvation them at the end, right? Whether you get there with a spouse or you get there kind of on your own, your sanctification will come in one of these two forms, right? They're hard paths, whichever one it is that you find yourself on, or whichever one that God leads you to. There's hard things about being married and, having a family, having that responsibility, submitting to one another in love, right? A lot easier said than done. And then there is also a struggle in being single, in struggling with, being on your own and all of the things that come with that as well. But either way, the goal at the end is salvation. Whether you get there through one or the other, that is the goal of every Christian. St. Paul really advocates for the single life, where he says, I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. And he says the same thing, the wife doesn't have to worry about caring about her spouse, but cares about pleasing the Lord. And he says, I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, and that you may serve the Lord without distraction. So really, if we are going to devote our life to serving God, and that's the path that we're going to be on, then, and that's what you kind of discern, then there it is, right? You're going to be able to please the Lord without distraction or without worrying about other responsibilities that you have. Now, if my path is marriage, right? If it is getting to heaven, with a partner, with a spouse, while you're helping each other, while you're maybe guiding your children, if God blesses you with children. And then from the perspective of the church fathers, they kind of give you a lot of different reasons why, marriage is this salvific path. So St. Augustine says, in matrimony, however, let these nuptial blessings be the objects of our love, offspring, fidelity, the sacramental bond. Offspring, I think, is the most obvious one, right? In the beginning, God told Adam and Eve to go forth, be fruitful, multiply. He gives Noah the same command after he gets off the ark, after the flood is over. So to have children, right? To procreate and to become this unit as a family where you're all coming to Christ as one. Fidelity, to, kind of stay pure. In that same chapter where St. Paul is talking about singleness, in the beginning, verse 1, it says 1 Corinthians chapter 7. It is good for a man not to touch a woman, nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. So it's a way to also flee the sexual immorality. And you have to also remember who he's talking to when he's writing that letter. So the people in Corinth were known for living a very carnal life, kind of just, following their own desires and their own passions, kind of doing whatever it is that they wanted to. So he's telling them, stop living this life of sexual immorality, and here's one way you can kind of, combat that. Obviously, this is not the only reason for marriage, and, I would dare to say that marriage is not the solution for, sexual immorality or struggling with lust or struggling with those, sexual sins. And you have to kind of figure out how to combat that before you even get married, because bringing that into marriage will have a lot more problems. But St. John Chrysostom says, marriage is the harbor in the storm, not just for procreation, but also for battling sexual temptations. He says many are not able to endure this, and that's why, the marriage is the good that will save them. And then the third one being the sacramental bond. Let me skip. So this icon right here, I saw it recently, and I really loved how it depicts, the bride and groom as us, being the church, and Christ being, our spouse, being in this image of even, kind of the Trinity, right? When God created us out of, or in his image, right, according to his likeness, it was between, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And we are supposed to, represent this union that they have with one another, where we read in the marriage ceremony from Ephesians 5:22, where it says, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, and husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. So we're not just receiving like earthly commands, but they're really reflecting something that is beyond the earth, something that is more eternal, something that is, between us and God, for a husband to love his wife to the point of death, the same way Christ, showed that to us on the cross, dying for us. That's a big command. That's a big call, right? It feels like something you can't carry on your own, and that's where you need Christ in the midst of the marriage. Same with, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. We're not just submitting to our husbands because he's our husband, but as to God, as I would treat, others as I would with Christ. So it's a much bigger picture than just, the earthly one. Marriage is meant for sanctification, right? And what does it mean to become sanctified? It's to become saint-like. Think of it this way, nobody is better at seeing your flaws than your spouse. They're kind of like, this mirror. You live with them day in and day out. They kind of see how you are in the good times and the bad times, and they can kind of point out and say, hey, this thing that you do, not so great, or the way that you're handling this situation, maybe, that's not the best way to do it, or hey, your anger is getting a little bit out of hand, or the way that you are, feeling about this or behaving a certain way. They can really hold up a mirror and they can say, look at this, and let's make each other better. Let's take out all of these flaws. Let's try to improve so we can become closer to Christ. And obviously God is the only one who can give you that grace to change. But your spouse, your partner is the one who is helping you navigate that path and walk in it day in and day out. Seek God's will. God, is it your will for me to, before even should I marry this person or that person, right? Because we love to know the answers all the time in our walk with God. But even before we ask that, ask is it marriage you want me on? Is it the single path? Is it, maybe I need to grow in my relationship with you first? Am I even ready? All of these questions we have to ask ourselves. I share in the book in the beginning, when I first met my husband in college, he was really thinking about the monastic path. And for the first maybe 3 years when I kind of knew him, he was a lot more introverted. I think you guys might have met him a couple of years ago at a spiritual day here. So he's a lot more extroverted now if you know him. Would kind of spend a lot of time in monasteries during our winter breaks and summer breaks, and was really talking with his father for confession and trying to discern if this was the thing for him. And then after he graduated, I always joke around and I say that's when he realized he missed me, because he didn't see me anymore in college, and he was like, oh, well, maybe this is another path that God would want for me. Anyway, so he was very clear about kind of asking me out, saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking. I want to see if there's any compatibility here. I want to see if there's a potential for a future. And that was his way of seeking God's will. He told me later, he's like, listen, if you would have said no, I would have known to maybe pursue the other route. Not everybody, is pursuing that, of course. In the book, I also interviewed another couple who was trying to discern this. I interviewed the guy first because he was a little bit, older when he got engaged and married. He was maybe in his early 40s. His wife was in her late 30s. So by that point, before the relationship started, he really struggled with, I want to be married, I want to be a father, tried dating different people, and it just never worked out for one reason or another. And after one like serious relationship that he had, was heading towards engagement, something happened where they weren't able to continue. And he's like, I was really devastated after that, frustrated as well. He's like, I kept praying for God to bless things. I kept praying for him to, open doors for me. And he's like, I'm living my life the way that, every typical Christian would, and I'm doing all the right things, and, how come God's not answering me? And he's like, talking with his father of confession told him, listen, I need you to kind of consider or even pray about, what if this is kind of your path? He's getting a little bit older. He's like, well, if it's not working out for you now, what if, the path of singleness is what God has for you? So he told me he really struggled with that, really prayed about it to the point, took a couple of years, till he kind of found peace in what this, life was. It's like I would, work, I would come home from work, I would have a lot of opportunities to serve, outreach. He was very active in church ministries. So he's like, you know what, I was content, and I kind of made my peace with it, and that was it. Now, on the other hand, his wife, before he knew her at that point, they actually went to the same parish, which is funny because it's a very large parish where you don't really know everybody. They're a couple of years apart, so, not the same friend group. She also was out of the country a lot, doing mission trips and working abroad, studying in a different state. So they also, missed each other at certain points. She also, tried dating different people, really wanted to become a wife, a mother one day, but it just wasn't working out. Again, kind of the same storyline of, you know what, God, if this is not what you have for me, fine. It is what it is, and I'm going to make my peace with it. Until one day, he's in liturgy. He is praying there, and he kind of sees this woman standing next to an elderly couple that he knew. Didn't really know who she was. He's like, well, I know everybody in my church, who's this new person? And it was a smaller weekday liturgy. And anyway, he realizes that this is their daughter, and he asks her out for a cup of coffee. He's like, you know what, let's just see, who this is. I kind of recognize her. Anyway, one thing led to another. They ended up getting engaged, married. They now have a child together. But, I'm sharing this story to kind of show you that sometimes it's our path to marriage might look a lot different than what we expect, or might look a lot different than what we want. God might have a very different timeline in how he takes us there. And don't look at it as, waste of time, or I'm just waiting and there's nothing I can do other than just wait. Look at it as also a time of refinement. A lot of fruit that can be born out of this time of waiting. Think of everybody who had to wait for anything in the Bible, right? Think of Moses being in the wilderness, being a shepherd for 40 years before God calls him back and asks him to lead his people out of Egypt. Think of King David, even though he was anointed to be king, spent years running away from Saul and trying not to get killed in the process, right? And you read and you see this relationship that David has with God in times of trouble, in times of praising him and worshiping him. There's a lot of fruit that come out of that season. What does your struggle look like during that time? And how's it bringing you closer to your ultimate destination? Whether that is, through marriage or through singleness, but the ultimate destination really is God. So, pray for God's will. Walk through the open doors that he has for you. Recognize the shut doors that he also has, right? Don't try to really fight against things that he hasn't really blessed in your path. And you just have to take one step after the other. I wish it was as easy or as simple as, you see someone's name written in the sky, right? We all wish we got some sort of crazy sign and, God, why don't you just show me who this person is, right? And some light is shining on someone you meet, right? It's not that straightforward. It's not that simple. But it is about taking small steps in faith until God leads you to his will. Right? Discern when and why you want to date. So sometimes we date out of, not so great reasons. Maybe, everybody else my age is dating. I feel lonely, right? I want a partner. And struggle in your loneliness. It's okay to feel lonely, right? But the question is, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to now fill your loneliness with things that are not going to fill you up and kind of keep you thirsty? Or are you going to fill yourself with Christ? Right? I want experience, or everybody around me already has this, quote unquote experience. Experience doesn't mean anything if it's not, in the right way. And that will naturally come. You don't have to just go looking for it. It's not really a reason to date. Or I don't want to lose this person that I like. Like, I'll see this with younger people. They're like, look, marriage is really not in the near future for me at all. But I found this person. I really like them. They're really great. We get along so well. I'm like, all right, good. But if we're going to take that and prolong it for years, that's not really healthy for the relationship. And I even challenge them and I say, if you really trust in God and if you trust that this is the right person he has for you, like, don't you trust that he's going to bring them to you in the right time, or he'll bring them back into your life, where you're not playing God. You're not trying to control the future so much by saying, oh, I'm going to stay with this person for years on end because I don't want to lose them. Like, trust that God will bring them to you in the right time. Or, I'm smart enough, I'm mature enough, I can figure out who it is that I want to be with. And again, this is maybe for the younger folks who are not ready in that stage. You guys mostly here are college and grads, right? Raise your hand if you're college. Okay, grads, I guess the rest. Okay. So maybe you are definitely, smart and mature enough at that stage. It looks very different than when you're like a first-year college student versus, you've graduated, or you even have some, more life experience under your belt, and you're able to discern more who you are, right? The first step in recognizing who's the right person for me is, self-awareness. It's like, who am I? Who is going to be, compatible with my personality and who I am, and really knowing yourself a little bit more there. There's a concept here that I kind of talk about in the book too, is having these three loves in this order. And it comes from the part in the gospel book where Christ is asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he answers, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. So that's the first one, right? We want to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, our strength. The same verse, you can find it even in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy, where God tells the Israelites to love him with all their heart, their soul, and their strength. You really should be all in on your relationship with God, right? That is going to be the foundation of everything else that you do in life, not just marriage and not just a dating relationship or a marriage relationship, but really that is the core of who you are as a Christian. And the second is you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So if I have this love from God and I recognize what that sacrificial, that, unconditional love looks like, if I am leaning on him to pour in me, now I can start pouring onto others, right? Now I could love my neighbor. Now I can have good friendships and good relationships. I know how to treat others, in that loving way. And don't forget this last part, right? As yourself. That's assuming you have this healthy relationship with, your, think self-confidence, self-esteem, the self-love. And it's not like a prideful kind of self-love, but it's the kind where you recognize who you are and your worth, right? Your self-worth is high because you are a daughter of God, you're a son of God, right? You are a child of the King of Kings. Knowing that about yourself, right? And having that, healthy relationship with who you are and how you see yourself will translate and will kind of spill over in the other relationships in your life, especially a romantic relationship. Because if we're lacking that, then we're going to look for it in other places. And one of the main places is, a romantic relationship. And if someone comes along and they're feeling my insecurities and they're giving me all the lovely words that, I want to hear, and it's not really a nice or healthy relationship, it's going to start leading me, down the wrong path, or it's going to bring me further away from Christ, or, that person will recognize that weakness and kind of use it to manipulate my actions, which, is dangerous and something for us to be aware of. So being confident in who you are and who Christ made you to be, now you know what kind of love you should be receiving, right? The kind of treatment that you should be experiencing in a relationship. And if that's not there, that's a red flag for you, which we'll talk more about in the second talk. But love God, really. If we, do that, everything else in life will kind of fall in the right place. There's a verse in Psalm 37, verse 4, which says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. You've heard this verse before, right? We kind of, when we're writing a cute little greeting card, happy birthday, may God give you all the desires of your heart, right? It's a verse that we want to use, right? We want to tell others, tell ourselves, and we forget like the first part of the verse where it says, delight yourself in the Lord. And what does it mean to delight, right? Delight is like a really, like a lovely term to use in describing our relationship with God. Like, we love him, we want to be with him, we look forward to spending time with him. There is like a delight in my soul with that. And if I'm already doing that, then, won't my desires kind of line up with what he desires for me, right? I'm not going to have desires that are going to bring me further away from him, but rather the opposite, where it's bringing me closer to God. And that's what we really should be striving for, delighting in him, loving him. And through that, everything else will come out of it in our life. Another thing we should all be doing in the time of singleness, in the waiting time, right, even before we jump into a relationship, is building our circle of guidance, which I kind of refer to as, here you are, you've got your family around, your priest, your mentors. Think maybe like your parents, if you have a good relationship with them, if they're in your life, or if they're not in your life, it's a mother figure, a father figure, somebody who's able to guide you. What does your relationship with your family look like? Because that will also influence who you pick, how you go about the process, and what your life like after marriage as well, and how your family relationship will be integrated in that. Now, all of these people have your best interest at heart, right? They're able to guide you and give you wise advice. Your priest, your father of confession, right? Don't come to Abuna where you're like, hey, Abuna, next weekend, can you pray my engagement ceremony? Or, hey, we need to book the church because we're getting married, right? That shouldn't be the first time he's hearing about your relationship. Involve him in the process as well. Get his wisdom and his guidance throughout it. And your mentors, maybe, this is like an older servant that you have a good relationship with. Maybe it's even like a older family member, cousin, or older friend, somebody who has already walked through what you've walked through. So think 10, 15 years maybe older than me. If I want to be married, I see somebody who has a good godly marriage that I can go to for advice, because they're giving me, the real reality of what things are, and not just what we, see in the movies and what we see in the media, which, by the way, is really terrible way to set up your expectations, right? All of the things that we're bombarded with, whether it's like Disney movies or rom-coms or just even social media in general, I think paint a picture of like infatuation and just temporary love, and not the eternal love that we're looking for, that sacrificial love. After I got engaged, one of the priests that I knew kind of gave me this advice. He's like, look, there's two kinds of marriages. There are hard marriages, or there's bad marriages. He's like, you pick one, right? He's like, even the hard ones are really worth it, and that's where really the good marriages come from. But if we are kind of just cruising through life, expecting it to be like what we see on the screens, we're going to end up in that bad marriage. Another thing you should be doing in your time of singleness is also building your boundaries. You're like, hold on, this doesn't make any sense. I'm not in a relationship yet, but you should know what these look like even before you have a significant other. So, physical boundaries I think are the most obvious ones, right? I'm not going to be doing this. I don't want to do anything that's going to lead me into temptation, right? And I'm going to communicate this when I start dating someone or when I enter a relationship. And then the emotional boundaries are recognizing there is like emotional intimacy that develops when I'm sharing with somebody who I am, and allowing them to kind of see who I am on a deeper level, not just kind of how my friends see me or other people, but kind of sharing maybe some things that I don't share with others, some things that I think about, some things that I hope for, some things that I fear. And the more that we share about ourselves, the more that we build this emotional bond. So we don't want to do that and spill everything out on the first date, right? We don't want to jump in too quickly in the deep end, like gradually get there, right? First build that trust with one another. I think sometimes why breakups hurt so much is, somebody will come and tell me, well, they know so much about me already, things that I don't usually share with people. But they did that way too quickly before building like a solid foundation and building this trust with one another and saying, hey, can this person handle the information that I will be sharing with them? So another thing to kind of think about as well. And, understanding that the physical connection between, men and women can keep you, bonded in a relationship that is not good for you, right? There's that, we call the love hormone, the oxytocin, that's kind of released, or the chemical like in our brain that's released during the time of any kind of really physical contact, whether that's like hugging, kissing, sexual intercourse. Even when a mother is nursing her child, there's that oxytocin again. And if I am getting physical with somebody outside of marriage, right, because this is meant for the sacredness of marriage. You are meant to bond with one another this way. That's how God designed it in the first place. If I'm doing that outside of it, I'm also building that bond that also might not be good for me, in that time with that person. And it's much harder to break up, much harder to pull apart in that time. Guard your senses, whether you're in a relationship or whether you're not. And I think we're probably maybe more tempted before we are in a relationship sometimes. Proverbs chapter 4, says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Put away from you deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips far from you. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet, and let all your ways be established. Do not turn to the right or the left. Remove your foot from evil. So we're going to guard what we say, right? The lips that are around us that are speaking, what we're hearing. Our eyes, what are we exposed to? What are we looking at? Our feet, like where are we going? What kind of environment are we putting ourselves in? And there is, in chapter, I want to say 8. Yes, chapter 8. It talks all about the temptation industry that we kind of live in. These are some just stats on pornography, but that's not the only temptation that that is kind of plaguing us these days. And it could be, found in a screen, found in something that I'm reading, something I'm listening to, just anything that will fall under the umbrella of like sexual immorality. I would definitely stay away from. So there is a website. It's also software that is made to help people kind of avoid these sites. It's called Covenant Eyes, and I pulled these stats from the website. Now there were stats about a lot of different groups, different age groups, different religious, non-religious, but I pulled the Christian one because I think that is something maybe we could relate to. It is a Christian-based website. So it shows, and again, this is just across America, not just one particular group or another. 54% of practicing Christians watch pornography, 75% of men, it's 40% of women, and 22% of Christians view pornography at least once a week, compared to 31% of non-Christians. who also view it weekly. And I'm going to expand this even more. It's not just pornography. Sometimes it is a TV show on Netflix that has really explicit content in it. Sometimes it's a novel I'm reading. Sometimes it's, you fill in the blank. Anything that is to sexual arousal, right? That's the whole point of how they kind of hook you and get you addicted, right? That dopamine hit, where, it kind of plays on your brain's reward system and it keeps you hooked on there. And, recognizing this is not God, first of all, I think we all can all agree on that. But even just the sexual the way it's not just, towards women, and a lot of the studies show that there's 88% of pornographic scenes contain physical aggression towards women, 48% contain verbal aggression, but it's also dehumanizing people in general, right? We're looking at them as objects and not as, somebody that God created with that, respect and worth and that love we should have towards one another. It really rewires your brain. And I put this in here, in the waiting talk because, one way to really ruin your marriage way before you're even married is getting addicted to pornography is really, it rewires our brain to see somebody who is a normal human being, but that attraction level is no longer there because I've kind of conditioned my brain and myself to only be attracted or only be, drawn to people who look like this, on the screen, or this is my expectation for what, my sex life and marriage is going to look like, which is obviously not the real thing, right? These are acted out and done in a certain way where it's not reality. So again, another thing I tell people is getting married will not solve your problem with pornography, will not solve your lust problem. It would only magnify it, will only make it worse. So work on that before you enter in a relationship, before you enter marriage, or there's a lot of different resources out there depending on how much you struggle with it. And recognize that the root problem really of it, a lot of psychologists and therapists will tell you this, the root problem of it is not just a lust problem, it's a loneliness problem. It's I want to connect with someone, I don't know how to do that, or I'm getting frustrated around my friendships, relationships, or looking for that strong connection with someone, and then I'm going to turn to something else, and pornography being one of them. So really get to the bottom of the root issue of why am I going towards these behaviors? Why am I acting this way? Why am I tempted with this? If you get to the bottom of it, then from there you could really start to solve the problem. Remember that we have saints in our church like St. Mary of Egypt, St. Moses the Strong, who lived such a, life full of sexual immorality before they repented, before they came back and sought God's forgiveness. Don't be stuck in this shame and guilt cycle, right? And we kind of know what the difference between shame and guilt is. Shame is guilt is feeling bad about something I did. Shame is more like I feel bad about who it makes me to be. It's more of an identity thing, right? So an example of that is I feel bad that I fell into the sin of lust, right? Versus, I am this terrible, lustful person, and really making it a problem about your identity more than just the sin, and kind of trying to separate the two so you can fight the sin directly. 2 Corinthians chapter 7 says, "For godly sorrow produces repentance leading to salvation, not to be regretted, but the sorrow of the world produces death." So that godly sorrow, that guilt that I feel, allow that to bring you back to God. Allow that to kind of wake you up a little bit and say, all right, I did something that I wasn't supposed to. I'm behaving in a way that I shouldn't, whether that's on my own as somebody who's single and what I do, on my own, or maybe in a relationship, I've done this or that, and I really feel bad about it. Let that, sorrow lead to repentance, lead to confession and seeking forgiveness and salvation, versus kind of wallowing in it and saying, well, I'm such a terrible person, and that is what, the worldly sorrow that produces death. Recognize the difference. Know that we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. Nobody is, pure from everything. Nobody is perfect in everything that they do, whether single or in a relationship or whatever your past might look like. Don't fear that. Fear it bringing you further away from God and staying there. That's what kind of the enemy, Satan wants us to do, to kind of wallow in our sin and say, God can't forgive me. God can't, won't accept me or won't allow me to turn back, or I'm never going to end up in a good relationship because of my past, and there's no way, to be redeemed from this. God makes all things new. We know that Christ, can do anything, and a big thing of that is redeeming our past. All right. Do we have any comments or questions? We can first start with any questions you want to ask in person. And I know we also have Slido for anonymous questions. Oh, you have to write them down too. If you want to write it down on a sticky note, you can. Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. Nothing that I've oh, you want me to? Okay. So she's asking how one of the reasons for marriage is offspring, right? And you're saying how is it that having children serves God? Okay. So, I have 3 little kids at home. And I'll tell you this, nothing that I've done in life is more more of a sanctification path than having children. I think God puts children in our lives for us, also for our betterment. It's very, very hard, very difficult, probably the most difficult thing that I'll ever try to do. In it, I think, we also recognize, or we maybe begin to partially understand God's love for us, and this love that he'll accept us no matter what. The same way we have that unconditional love for our children, even if it's just a fraction of it and we're human, it's obviously not compared to his love. But in that, it really is a path to salvation too. It's very salvific in how it is. And also just from the practical side, right? The offsprings and filling the earth. That's what really, grew humanity in the beginning, where we see these commandments. So teaching, a child the ways of the Lord and what the Bible tells us about that is a service to God. Your first service when you're married, when you have children, are your children, your spouse. That is the biggest service you can offer, I think, at that point in your life, more than service outside anywhere as well. So there's a lot to it there. I don't know if any of the priests want to add to that as well, or I'm sure, a lot of wisdom in that topic.
I'm so glad that you said that when you are taking care of your children, then you can see the love of God, because you see somebody who is totally depending on you, and they cannot do anything without you, and you are like a God to your child. And that's why the Bible said, didn't I say you are gods? Because you are gods when you take care of the children who don't know anything, and you give them love, you give them food, you give them what they need at the right time. Also, we do see prophets who became very good spiritually because they were taking care of sheep. Yeah. When they take care of sheep and they see that the sheep also depend on them in a lot of things, and they trust them, they will give them the food, they will take them to the right place, they will give them comfort and so on. Then you start to trust God a lot, like your child is trusting you. You also trust God that He is taking care of you completely. The other thing is that you are bringing up somebody who will be a servant of God, a child of God. So that's also good because you are contributing to the body of Christ. You are taking care of somebody who will be a member of the body of Christ. So certainly having children can lead you to salvation, can lead you to a good relationship with God, submitting to God all your life.
Okay, let me go to that then. Anybody else want to ask a question here before we go to the anonymous questions? Okay, question about assessing your partner's faith and compatibility. We'll talk about that in the second talk. Okay. How to set the right boundaries. So I think that starts with knowing yourself and knowing like what you can handle, what you can't handle. I always tell people, you know, you don't want to do anything that leads to any sort of sexual arousal. There are studies that show your frontal cortex, you know, the part of your brain that makes decisions, right, that's responsible for critical thinking. Parts of it actually deactivate when you reach that state of sexual arousal. So, you know, in that state, you're not thinking clearly, you're not able to make the right decisions. You know, that self-control that you have, or hopefully that you have, doesn't really kick in as much. So you want to do everything to even avoid that. Don't even, you know, put yourself in that predicament. So, you know, for some, it's maybe kissing, so we want to avoid that. For some, it's something way less than that. For some, it's, oh, you know, I'm looking around and there's nobody, you know, we're here alone, so there's no accountability, so I'm going to feel free to do whatever I want, or I'm not going to feel that I have to, you know, behave a certain way. So figure out what it is, you know, that puts you in that vulnerable state and avoid it. There's actually a study also in the book. Do you guys know the book Atomic Habits? It's a very popular book about changing your habits and developing new ones. They looked at war veterans from Vietnam. I know this is a stretch, but just hear how I'm going to tie it back. But they found that a lot of them were addicted to heroin while they're out there, right? They're under really hard circumstances of war, fear. It was easily accessible to them. You know, they were able to get it somehow and distribute that across each other. Now, they followed those men who, you know, were addicts when they went back home, and they found that 90% of them stopped the addiction. That's a really high percentage, right? Did they go to rehab facilities? Did they try to do, you know, detox programs and certain things? No. What they found was it was their environment that was contributing to the addiction and contributing to the behavior. So once they're taken out of that really harsh environment of like just being in a war zone, not having accessibility to it, and not being surrounded by peers who are also, you know, doing heroin and having the same kind of behavior, that took them out of, you know, the addiction part. So, you know, I'm tying this back to our environment, right? Guarding our senses, who we're surrounding ourselves with, what is around us. That will really influence our habits more than how self-control will influence our behaviors in those circumstances. So setting the right boundaries, knowing what environment that is going to produce, you know, good decisions and make me do the right thing versus which ones are not, is a big step there. Okay, what is a safe and good way to break up? Hopefully you feel safe in your relationship overall, right? So you're not fearing that. There's actually a whole chapter in the book on breaking up. I didn't intend for there to be one, But I kind of kept writing, and it was right after like talking about compatibility. It's like, all right, what if you're not compatible? Like, what do you do? How do you handle that? And being honest and open with one another from the beginning, from when you start feeling like, you know, things are not right here, or things are a little bit off, or I'm not, this is not the kind of relationship that I envisioned. You know, communicating those things that you're concerned with, I think is a good way. It kind of preps people to say, or to see that maybe we're not heading in the right path or not on the same page, versus, you know, keeping all those things kind of mustered up inside, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I think we need to break up, and they're totally blindsided by it, and they're like, hey, come from? Like, I thought everything was fine. So open communication is a good thing. And then, you know, understand that this is the whole point of dating, right? To figure out if this is the right person or if it's not. It's a 50-50. It's a yes or it's a no. And if the answer is no, if it's not the right person for you, then breaking up is, you know, the right choice in that. Question, is it wrong to watch romance movies or shows? It's not wrong, but you have to ask yourself, what is it doing to you, or how are you reacting to it? Because one person can see a movie and they're entertained by it and they're done, versus another person who like really takes it in, really dwells on it. I actually was talking to a group of younger girls about this, and I asked them, like, I'm like, hey, how do you feel after you watch like a romantic movie? And one of them was like, I feel really single, you know? I feel that I'm missing this thing, and it makes me, you know, think about it, makes me really want it. And I was like, all right, for somebody like that, where the movie is kind of planting these thoughts that you don't want to, you know, struggle with so much, then don't watch them, or find other things to watch instead. So ask yourself, you know, how's it making me feel? And I'm talking about like clean movies. Obviously, they're the movies that are R-rated, that are filled with like the sexual scenes I would avoid. But you know, just see how you are reacting to it. Is it necessary to discuss your past with your partner? So there's two different schools of thought on this that I've kind of seen. You know, ones that'll tell you, no, you've already repented, you've already confessed, it's not in your past anymore, you don't need to discuss it. And then the other thought, which I kind of lean more towards, is when things are getting very serious, when we are making that decision to get engaged, get married, and there's something in your past that you think might affect your future, that's where I would discuss things. So I'm assuming this question is asking about like romantic relationship paths, not like, you know, just other things. But there's other things that you also want to consider sharing, like if you have, you know, a health issue you struggle with, or a mental health issue, or something that's going to affect your future. You know, keeping that a secret is not recommended before you enter marriage. So if you think, like, let's say, you know, I was addicted to pornography at a certain point, that will most likely, again, not 100%, most likely affect your marriage in the future. Again, also depends on how long ago was this, how reoccurring was it, how long have you kind of, you know, been clean, so on, you know, quote unquote, or stayed away from it. Because just from different experiences and different things, you see how that can become an issue in marriage later on, to the point where I've seen it, because it's, you know, a secret that was kept, allowed couples to get, you know, an annulment or a separation. Again, these are like worst case scenarios we're talking about. Or like, hey, you know, I've had a lot of sexual partners in the past, and I don't share with that with my partner, and they find out later on, you know, they feel really deceived, and they feel like, you know, lied to at that point. Get guidance from your father of confession, or somebody who's kind of been walking you through, you know, the issue or whatever it might be, and they can give you better guidance on the situation, because it really varies from person to person and situation to situation. I have a few blog articles on this, because this question comes in a lot. My blog is just, it's on my website. It's lillianandrews.com. I think there's maybe 3 different articles on there about like sharing my past, when, or even if you should. Sometimes the other person doesn't want to know. So it's kind of like, you know, don't ask, don't tell situation. And then sometimes it's like, I'm really afraid to lose this person if I share with them my past. And, to that I say, then they're probably not the right person for you if they're not able to, extend that grace and that forgiveness and see who you've become after that. They're only seeing you through, the light of your past and what you've done. Maybe it's not the right person to move forward with in a relationship or not.
The question is the timing, about the timing. يعني if somebody like had even, for example, the marriage, a previous marriage that was voided, then should he say that from the start, or keep it to himself for a little bit till the other side will know that he is good and he can be loved and he has good characteristics and so on, then he start to say that, or say it from the beginning? What do you think about that?
So something like that, I would probably wait a little bit until they know me, like my personality, like who I am a little bit. They have a bigger picture of like who I am before I kind of, share something like that. Because sometimes when we share that from, the first time they meet me, now they're only seeing me through that lens, or it's kind of like becomes like a label almost of like, they're a divorcee or whatever it might be. So I would allow them to get to know me a little bit first before, sharing something like that. Because you do have to share something in that sort of situation that was, like it's public, knowledge that somebody was married before. Yeah.
Can I ask another question? You mentioned pornography and how prevalent it is, and obviously how addictive and destructive it is. But you said, maybe we should try to, that marriage is really not going to be the one that resolves it, and we should try to work on this. So in your opinion, have you seen any effective methods of overcoming pornography that have worked in the past? Because it's very difficult to overcome it, and sometimes a lot of the youth struggle with that.
Yeah. So there's different things for like different levels of like the addiction or like how bad it is for somebody. So simple things like downloading certain softwares that will block this kind of content from your phone, your computer, so you can't, even when you search it and when you're tempted to look at it, like you don't have access to it. I've seen, different support groups that are out there, like how there's like AA, which is Alcoholic Anonymous. There's also ones for like sexual things that you struggle with, pornography being one of them. I'm sure you could find local ones that, if you're open to this sort of form of, sharing and, it is really a proven way that helps people. Sometimes it's getting help with like a counselor or like a professional. Certain therapists have a qualification that focuses on this sort of thing, on pornography and certain sexual sins, rather than just like a typical therapist. There's also a lot of like online programs you could like learn more about. I think education is a big one, understanding the harm of it, understanding how it affects you, how to overcome it, all of these things together. And then, having that accountability with like your father of confession and talking with somebody that can walk you through it really helps. So there's a lot of different angles where somebody can try to help them through that. Yeah. Any other questions on this topic? There's a lot more questions in here that are coming in. How much time do we have for? Okay. Okay. And I'll look through these as well in the meantime, and I can touch on all of them next talk.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for your engagement and for your great questions. Lovely. We'll have some more time in our next talk. But now we'll move to our small group activity, and we have a slightly shorter time, but might just inch into lunch a little bit. But so we'll we'll begin the small group activity, but I'm sorry. Yeah, can you check with Michael where different places that we'll go? Sorry, just a second, everybody. We can take a breather. Maybe we can stand up, get some energy. Okay. Well, so, I mean, maybe we could take one other question, because we're just getting some info on the small groups. Okay. All right. One more, everybody.
So this one is also about boundaries, kind of goes along with what we talked about. Said, how can I set boundaries with my partner without hurting their feelings and still ensure it's in both our best interests? So remember that in the dating process, you're still getting to know one another. You're not really responsible for one another yet. You're not married, right? You don't have that level of commitment and the commands that were given, like in the marriage ceremony. It's not there yet. So you're still responsible for your own self. Like, think of, you've heard the phrase, guard your heart, right? Maybe, popular phrase sometimes. So you really do have to guard yourself if you know, like, this is what my boundary is, and maybe you have like the more conservative boundary or the more strict boundary. That's what, as a couple, you should be holding to. It's more for, not the loose boundary of like, oh, nothing bothers me and I could do anything, but it's for the person who has that stricter boundary. And they should be able to respect, right? Your partner should be able to respect what that boundary is and actually, abide by it. Looking out for each other's best interest is one way to determine, like, does this person actually have my best interest at heart? Is it just about them? Are they putting, my needs into consideration when they're making decisions and the way they're behaving and acting in the relationship? So if somebody's saying, yeah, I respect your boundary, and they're not actually, living that out, then that is a sign here that maybe something is a little bit off. So don't be afraid of setting the boundaries. The right person will respect them. If they don't, then maybe that's a sign they're not the person for you.
Thank you, Tasoni. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much again for sending in your questions, and thank you so much, Tasoni, for all your insight. Okay, so we will move to our, we're actually just going to have like a quick kind of game together before we start lunch, and we can do that in the social hall. So everyone can, now we can join each other in the social hall now. Thank you. And then after lunch, we'll come back for our next talk. Thanks, everybody.